Hey everyone, I know this might seem kind of out of character, but we actually have picked up an advertiser on the show that we're really excited to share with you. We're going to talk more about it later on in the episode, so stay tuned for that. But for now, I just want to say that Lucky Paper Radio is brought to you by Boom Mobile. Are you tired of your signal cutting out at the worst moments? Don't exhaust yourself searching for better coverage. Boom Mobile has you covered. With nationwide 5G, crystal clear calls, and speeds that leave the competition in the dust, you'll never have to deal with big mobile companies again. Plus, with our unlimited plans, there's no hidden fees, just pure, explosive value. Boom Mobile. Fast, reliable, boom. More details at boom.us. Stay tuned until later in the episode to find out more about our partnership. Get started and start recording an episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony, kitchen table correspondent, Maddox.
Hello, welcome to the kitchen table. Good to be here with you. We're looking at onions this week.
Yeah, that's why I teed you up.
Bean front coming in.
Because you like cooking a lot. And that's the kind of kitchen table I was talking about.
It's true.
Or was I?
I did.
Words that mean two things. Incredible.
Did some bread baking today, which is always satisfying. It's so fun just to start with a big box of flour and bring it to life.
I will say you find it always satisfying because you're very good at it. A lot of people find it very frustrating.
You say very good at it. One of them is a little overproofed, so I don't know. It's kind of room for improvement.
Well, Anthony, I'm clarifying that you're the kitchen table correspondent because we have a guest in this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. We are joined by Julien, Pro Tour correspondent, Henry. Fresh off the Pro Tour. How are you doing, Julien?
Hello. Yeah, I'm doing well. Still recuperating from the trip and 10 days of being crammed in an apartment with 12 other Magic players.
Do you enjoy that part of the experience, or is that like a cost you just pay to go play on the Pro Tour?
No, it's definitely enjoyable to a small dose. Like, I wouldn't want to have it last much longer than that. For sure, it definitely has downsides, but it's an occasion as well to see people that I have known for a long time now, but don't get to see very often. So,
when did you first play on the Pro Tour?
My first Pro Tour was Oath of the Gatewatch, which is like
2015?
2016, I think.
15, 16, something like that?
Yeah.
So when you were at the Pro Tour, we were like cracking our first packs of Magic ever. We're Magic babies.
A little earlier than that. A little earlier, but yeah. That's more or less when we started getting really invested in the game. Well, we got Julien today not to pick his brain about competitive Magic, but instead to pick his brain about one of the silliest cubes that we have in our playgroup, which is Anthony's Turbo Cube, which... Anthony, why don't you just set the table for us, both explaining what this cube is for people that maybe don't know.
So the Turbo Cube is a project that I've been working on for quite a while at this point. It kind of started as a joke, but the gimmick of the cube is all spells and activated abilities cost 2 generic mana less. This was actually inspired by an arena event where they sort of discounted all the spells and everything was weird and wacky, and I just kind of wanted to lean into that very hard and just see if you could actually make a fun experience. And I was surprised that it actually was pretty fun, and so it kind of evolved into its own thing from what started out as kind of a joke.
And then what are we doing today with regards to the Turbo Cube?
I find it a little bit difficult sometimes to have the motivation to update my cubes. You know this. The listeners might know this.
This entire thing is just accountability. We are just here to keep you accountable.
Exactly, yeah. So I thought it'd be fun if we could all put our heads together. I know that both of you have played this cube quite a bit and had great success and have strong opinions about it. So maybe we could just go through the cube, talk about some of the particular things I've changed most recently, and talk about the sort of like success of those, as well as some potential big future changes to it.
And is this not in the context of you wanting to decrease the power level of this cube across the board?
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the big motivating factors of me wanting to get back in and do some big design on this, because honestly, it's like it's in a place that it's not a cube that I want to play every week. It's definitely not fundamentals of good, clean Magic. It is, as they say, absolute clown shoes.
Bad, dirty Magic.
Bad, dirty Magic, but it is fun every once in a while, so it doesn't feel like it's in a spot that like it needs a bunch of change. Like there aren't problems that I think are fundamentally broken that I want to fix, but I had this idea of games are going a little too fast. A lot of games are ending turn one when players just don't get a chance to do everything. Somebody just draws their whole deck and combos off, and I didn't like the idea of trying to power it down by just cutting the best cards, because that's kind of the fun thing of the cube, is like I get to pick Guild Globe, which is now like literally better than power would be in a vintage cube. So I don't want to cut those cards. So I had the idea of, what if I just expand the size of it? So those cards just come up less often. And I realized this would also have another sort of knock-on effect of a lot of the 2-card combos or like 2-card interactions just show up every time. And if you're very familiar with the cube, you can really take advantage of that. And just like, oh, here's a what's the scarecrow that I love to draft?
Farmstead Gleaner. It's like, I never want to pass that card because I know it's a combo with pathway arrows, and somebody who hasn't drafted the cube a bunch won't know that. Yeah, I'll say the 2-card combos here are especially like insider knowledge. Like,
yes.
People don't know that Synod Sanctum is a great combo enabler in this cube until you've done it once or twice.
Yeah, and so I think that I've been inspired to try and make big changes to the gameplay just by adding a bunch more cards to the cube. So effectively diluting some of those power, diluting some of those combos, and hopefully making the cube a little bit slower and a lot more fun.
I know you have some questions prepared, but before we get to that, I actually just want to ask you, Julien. We've talked about this cube, so much on this podcast. I'm sure we can put some past episodes we focus on this cube in the show notes if people want to hear our thoughts on this cube, but we've never heard your thoughts on this. Could you maybe articulate, like, do you have a hypothesis for how the Turbo Cube plays and what you ought to do as a player to try and win?
I have not necessarily been able to put that in practice as much, but I do have a suspicion that actually leaning into the disruption that exists, like I'm thinking specifically about the strongest hate bears in the cube, might actually be a pretty reliable recipe for success, especially since that's a strategy that tends to be underdrafted.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking about cards like Eidolon of Rhetoric or Phyrexian Censor in particular, which are, or Archon of Emeria, like even better, extremely strong at stopping the level 1 of the cube, which is to have a combo deck that's as fast as possible. And even though those combo decks that's as fast as possible, as powerful as possible, are really scary and can and do win on turn 1, they're not necessarily the most consistent. This is still draft. You have your opening hand. You're gonna have to play some cards you don't really want in your deck. It's not actually happening turn 1 on the play all that often.
Sometimes you cycle 11 times and you don't find your payoff. That's just normal Magic. That happens in every game of Magic.
We're all familiar with that experience, of course.
And you just need, like, if you're able to relatively consistently grab those strong disruption piece, it's much more consistent to be able to like slam one of those on turn 1. But there are definitely some like variants to it. Like the ones that I mentioned, I think are probably a lot stronger than cards like Talia or Glow Rider, which are fine, but definitely not hard luck. Whereas the other one will probably just stop most deck in the Turbo Cube from functioning unless it can remove it.
Yeah, that is a funny quirk of the tax effects that just increase the cost of things by 1, is a lot of the cards do cost 1 mana printed on the card, so when you add 1 and subtract 2, they're still free. It's like, oh great, I actually had an opponent the other day like, oh, I guess I have to tap my land to cast my egg, and it's like, nope, you're all good, go for it. This is not a problem.
Egg's still broken. One thing that I feel like has come up a lot that I don't have a clear sense of is how good these really strong hate bear pieces are just in any deck. The idea being that if you get to go first, you get to do all your unfair stuff and just end your turn with an Archon of Emeria. Does that play pattern feel viable to you, or do you think they really need to be in a deck that is, at least one of its chief strategies is sort of shutting the game down and playing a more fair Magic?
I think you probably want to lean a little bit towards the second one if the effect is so strong, and that's already kind of what you're mulliganing towards. You might be a little low on resources to begin with, and if you have one of those head pieces in your hand, it's going to be much harder to like successfully assemble your Storm-like deck and actually successfully go off. And if you try to go off and you do fail and you end up with the hate bears, then yeah, maybe you're not going to lose, but you might be in a worse spot than if you had some of the, let's say, a very strong mid-range card that works by themselves. I'm thinking about card like Retrofeeder Foundry that will end the game.
V1 probably, yeah.
It is so fast to end the game. I mean, it is both like too slow to beat any kind of combo, but it's also like will beat any scrap hate bear functioning piece, like even like an Urza that's left in play and maybe can't be activated for some reason. A side with a couple of tokens will be overpowered by this Retrofeeder Foundry. Walking Ballista is another one. You need those strong mid-range pieces, and you just need probably one or two of those to combine with your hate piece to finish the game.
It is interesting to me how I think a much more interesting metagame kind of evolved in this cube than I would have expected, where, like you're saying, there is the level 1, I'm going to try and draw my deck and combo off. There's a level 2 of...
Which many people still maintain is the level you should just stop thinking at.
Oh, yeah. Like, I mean, that's usually what I try to do.
That's what Allison does every time, and Allison always makes it work.
I mean, I don't think that's quite giving her credit, because she can see through the matrix and do combos that I don't even understand. I'm just like, what does your deck do?
Well, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that Allison, that is still Allison's strategy in this cube, and it still works for her.
It's true. But there is that level 2 of the hate bears, and then maybe it's a little bit of another level. Like, I've definitely been playing this way, where I'm mostly trying to do the unfair thing, but I will play a couple of hate bears, because it is so powerful to dump your hand on turn 1 and then, just shut the door before your opponent even gets a chance by playing your Phyrexian Censor. And even if you're not winning that turn, often that just means you have enough board presence to win the game over a couple turns. But then I've also found that the spot removal has been really, really important as people have been respecting the hate bears more. And, I lost a match this last week or 2 weeks ago where I had a fairly effective hate bear package, but my opponent just had exactly the right amount of removal to be able to get rid of them, so they could still combo off.
Yeah, it is funny that like a meta will pretty much always evolve. It's hard for a strategy to be so good that it's still the best thing even when completely uncontested and nobody's trying to play the counterplay. So I agree. It has been a kind of interesting dynamic, at least in our local meta. Now, I don't know, do you get people writing into you all the time telling you about their copies of the Turbo Cube and their play groups and how they're playing for them?
Occasionally, not a ton. I know Joe in Idaho just posted that he has a clone and he's been having a lot of fun with it, and a couple other people, as well as in Philadelphia, they have sort of a very different kind of like much more focused around have a 1 mana 3/3. That's a pretty good card rather than just doing all storm. So it's been interesting to see that kind of like very different evolution of this style of cube. But it also has been interesting to see people play it at events. So I was recently at Vertex Philadelphia, and it was cool to see people, winning with a lot of fast bond combos. A lot of black discard was really powerful. Although,
yeah, I love to
something
hear
I will
it.
note, somebody was like, they had a 3/0'd with a black discard, and they really enjoyed their deck, and the deck looked sweet. And it's like, that's all very cool. I'm glad you're having fun with Waste Not, but I think the Orcish Bowmaster is like really, really is what allowed your deck to function.
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Because this is maybe a bit of a bird walk, but I want to say that like the 100 Ornithopters cube, there's enough people with copies of that cube now that they write me frequently, and it's shocking to me how different the local metas are.
Interesting,
like,
yeah.
Multiple play groups insist that their group has settled on the best deck and all agreed that it's X, and they do not agree with each other even a little bit. And it is very fascinating to me that some people are like, well, obviously you have to be playing combo with a couple control spells, or obviously you have to be playing aggro, or obviously you have to be playing Fomori Vault. Someone told me that Fomori Vault was the best card in the cube, hands down. And I'm like, there's glimpse of nature and a conspiracy and guys created on Tolarian Academy here, and they're like, nope, Fomori Vault. Fomori Vault is the problem.
What exactly is a Fomori Vault?
It's a colorless land that you can pay a couple mana and tap it, and you get to look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and put one into your hand. Discard a card too. It's not card advantage, it's card selection, right?
Yeah, I don't know about this card.
That sounds right, but
I think it's
fine.
good here, but I mean, somebody clearly ruined everyone's evening with the Fomori Vault, wherever that play group is, and now everybody's scarred. Which is just to say that, I think it's interesting that none of us are playing these cubes anywhere near enough to have any kind of objective idea about what the actual like supercomputer meta is, but also that doesn't matter. Like,
yeah,
this is your copy of the cube, whatever is having success in your local meta or in the metas of these events where you take it to. That's what matters and what should be addressed. I think it's worth acknowledging up front that like, who knows if you sat down a bunch of Pro Tour players for a month and made them play this cube 10 times a day, what they would settle on as the best deck, but that's not what's happening. So,
well, good news, we have our Pro Tour player here to help us out.
Simply solve it for us, Julien.
Yeah. Have you know that every time there's a Pro Tour, that's what pro players do. They do like
the testing house.
10, 15 people sitting in a house for a week and trying to break the limited format. And
even when you have multiple Pro Tour houses doing that, they often disagree with each other.
Exactly. That's where I was coming to.
Didn't mean to.
I was just like, yesterday I was I was watching a vlog of what happened in the Channel Fireball testing house, and I was looking at their limited rankings, and I found some pretty big discrepancy with the one that we had. I tested with Team Handshake, which is usually considered to be on the same level as Team Channel Fireball, and yeah, there's just like big differences between the teams. So I'm absolutely not surprised by you having that feedback, and every individual's opinion is also incredibly influenced by other people's opinion around them. I mean, we have here in Baltimore in the like people really love the cantrips because
we couldn't have you on without getting you to talk about why people should take cantrips out of their cube.
That's not the point I'm making. I'm just saying that
is the point that has emerged organically.
People do like cantrips a lot more here than in other groups, and that people have made the mention, like when drafting at cube events such as Vertex, it's like, wow, like I did not expect those cantrips to wheel because in Baltimore they never do.
Yeah, every group is different. Some people are right about cantrips, like us here in Baltimore, and some people that haven't experienced their power yet, like all the other play groups.
Some groups put Clarion Spirit in every single cube, which makes the cantrips better.
Turns out.
So what do you guys think about the basic core concept of making the cube bigger? The other sort of parallel question is, currently we've been drafting the cube with 4 packs of 13, and the goal there was to basically give you more cards because decks end up playing very, very few lands. We felt really stretched for playables, so I wanted to increase the pool size, but I didn't want to have like 20 card packs because especially when you're trying to do this recontextualization, a huge pack is really overwhelming. So we're at 4 by 13 packs. The other thing we could do is just cut down the pool size back a little bit so that decks are just forced to be a little bit scrappier because they're not necessarily playing every card that they want to be playing.
There's definitely always a downside of having a non-standard pack size. So if there is a way to cut back to that, that's definitely interesting. Doing that in addition to increasing the cube size might be like a little too much at once. That's my instinct.
I know this was my first thought when you said, you were like, can we jank this up a little bit, right?
Jank it up.
Like, decks are a little too streamlined. They're, winning on turn 1 a little more frequently than maybe you would like, or effectively winning. Often the game is not actually over, but it's basically over after turn 1. And that was definitely my first instinct, was like, well, yeah, you can make the cube bigger, but also, I also feel that there is like an ambiguous cost to non-standard pack size, and people have made the argument, and I think it's a fair argument, that like, if you're the designer and you're setting up the draft, that most players don't really care. They'll sit down and draft how many packs you give them with however many cards in them as you want. But I do think there's some kind of like weird what's going on here, like, question in drafters' heads that make them wonder, why is it being done this way? Maybe they'll ask, maybe they won't. So to me, that's probably the first thing I would do, is just go back to standard 3x15. But I wanted to ask because a couple weeks ago, we drafted the Turbo Cube on a cube night where there was miscommunication on the Discord, and we didn't have a third cube on hand. We had a few more than 16 people, and you ended up just kind of ballooning the draft and playing with more than your pack size intends.
Principle of cube night. We everybody cubes.
Yeah, those are the 2 rules. Be consistent, everybody drafts. Now, what pack size did you end up landing on? Do you remember?
I believe we did 2 packs of 13 and 1 pack of 14 because it's just like, that's how we could get the most cards into people's hands. So it was really constrained.
That's smaller than a regular. How did you feel about the outcome of that draft? Because you played those matches, I saw a bunch of them. That is an okay test run for what if we just made the pack size closer to typical. How did you feel about the results?
That's a great point, and the results definitely felt janky. I think especially during the draft portion, people were like, I do not have enough playables for where I am at this portion of the deck. And people played a lot more basic lands than they wanted to. So I think it did have the effect of, especially I think those players that were just like, I'm just going to put extra basic lands and just sometimes get super flooded. That part of the experience was not great, but people still had powerful decks and were able to combo off very quickly.
I think there's definitely a amount of jankiness that is maybe appealing, which is like, and to me, that if I were you, that amount of jankiness would be people are playing the cards that they otherwise would hope to sideboard that are in their colors. Yeah. Not enough jankiness that people are like, well, screw it. I guess I got to play 3 more basic lands than I want because I got to get to 40 and there's no playables that I can even consider putting in my deck here. But yeah, I mean 13, 13, 14 that's a small pool size.
That's a small pool.
5 fewer cards than you would have in 15, 15, 15, and substantially fewer, a whole pack fewer than you have in your current draft format, basically. So it's probably not quite representative of what it would actually be like to cut it down. And also, you still basically drafted the entire cube. Did you have like an odd number of cards left over?
Like 5 or so random cards. Somebody could do the math. It doesn't matter.
So you still basically saw, they didn't necessarily talk about the 2-card combo problem, which is another sort of corollary to this.
Yeah. So I was just doing a little quick math here. Currently with the 4x13, we have 52 card pools. If we switch it down to 3x16 or 4x12, both of those options are 48 cards, which is like not a huge shift, and I think looking at 16 cards is pretty reasonable. So my feeling is, and then also if I go up to 550, which for logistical reasons I think more than 550 would just be like too many cards to deal with, especially going to an event, stuff like that. Like you have to shuffle the whole thing. So I think by going to 3x16 and about 550 cards, you're then playing with 70% of the cube every time. Does that kind of feels reasonable to me?
I guess you just, in terms of like, depends what kind of card you want to add to the cube. For many of the cards that are in the cube, there are similar cards that exist that could be added.
Mm-hmm.
It would somewhat defeat the purpose of making the cube bigger to add more copies of very similar cards, I guess. Except for maybe diluting specifically the 2-card combo aspect, which I feel like I haven't, in the cubes that I've played, I've not been that big of a part. I can only think of 2 right now that are in the cube. Do you feel like there've been a problem?
I don't think it's necessarily been a huge problem for gameplay. I think it's more about the draft experience that, like, especially just for myself, it's like, again, I know those 2-card pairs and I have trouble passing them, and that just like, it just, even if I don't end up...
It's a personal problem.
It is, yeah.
Well, this whole episode is just because Anthony needs accountability to update his cube, so this is just a personal problem through and through.
You could just cut those combos if you wanted.
Oh, what?
So to be clear, what you want the experience of opening one of these cards and not feeling compelled to take it because you don't know if the other half of the combo is going to be there.
Exactly, yeah.
So you want to like pick up your pathway arrows on the wheel and then take Farm Siglinear aggressively instead of...
I still want to draft the combo.
Oh, I know you do.
There's
no question about that. But you don't want it to feel like a compulsory pick, where right now it feels like a compulsory pick to you. Okay. Well, should we talk about what cards we might add to make this cube bigger?
Yeah, I mean, before we do that, let's talk about like a couple of the themes in the cube and some recent changes, and I'm curious to get your take on how you feel. Like, we've already talked a little bit how the Hate Bears deck you think has been pretty successful, and that was not necessarily a huge feature of the original design, but was sort of added in to try and just create a little bit more deck diversity and like different strategies. You think that's a pretty successful, effective deck that's worth jumping into?
Sure.
Has that not been there from basically the beginning?
Maybe a little bit, but we definitely amped it up a bunch.
Frankly, it just got a lot of really good cards printed in the past 24 months, 24 years. It had a lot of good cards printed recently.
You can say that about Magic.
You can say that too. So I think that honestly might be a factor there.
Cool. So we got that. That's definitely having the like positive impact that I'm excited about for making the removal relevant. There's also, and you were a big advocate of this, Andy, of pushing this like black discard theme, and I've seen some success with that at events. And I know you've drafted it as well, Andy. Do you have like feelings on how that's working?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I was kind of championing this archetype. Mm-hmm. I got really invested in the idea of Megrim being a sort of prison card, just a punisher effect against cycling, right?
Yeah.
I think it has come up a bunch in this cube is that there actually are very few ways to punish cycling. As an activated ability from a non-permanent, they're just things you think punish it, oftentimes don't. And as one of the like most unfair things that you can do here, it often feels like there's very little counterplay to it. And so I was, many months ago on a deep Scryfall search looking for any way to punish people cycling, came across Megrim, which says whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose 2 life, and was just like, well, here it is. Like, this is awesome because it's both a Punisher card and also could theoretically be built around proactively as a, engine piece if your deck has a bunch of wheels or something. And this is the classic thing where, I didn't force this deck, but it was, of course, the deck I was thinking of.
You were aware of it.
I was very aware of it, and then, in the first couple drafts, nobody played the Megrims, and so I wheeled that one and the 2-mana Megrim and Liliana's Caress, and I definitely basically ended up, soft forcing this deck twice back to back, and I think it is definitely functional. My first experience was that my deck was heavily reliant on specifically Waste Not. It was like the games where I have Waste Not feel so different than the games where I don't have Waste Not. And it was specifically obviously making creature tokens as a win condition is huge, but also making mana meant that I could go Waste Not into my own mutual discard spells that would then just start making mana and like kind of chain a bunch of things together and kind of make the whole engine turn. I will say that Orcish Bowmasters was an essential part of one of those decks too, the one I had more success with, though I think it is not maybe all it's cracked up to be. Like, I don't think it's as good as, for example, like Mana Gorger Hydra, frankly. I think it's kind of similar maybe in power level to Mana Gorger Hydra, but I had games where I like had a giant army and had like pinged my opponent for a bunch and still couldn't kill them because they had jump blockers. It was like, all right, well, kind of did your job, but it wasn't enough. I think it's a card that definitely belongs here, but I would not call it the linchpin of the archetype. If anything, I still think that's Waste Not, and Orcish Bowmasters is a nice complement. There's a bunch of other cards that also are very functional in this space. I will still keep advocating for Shoulder of the Apocalypse. You can still keep saying no, but I want on record every time we talk about this deck that I think that would be, something that's worth 2 mana and very strong, but I would still probably take Waste Not over it if I was in pack 3 and knew it was the discard deck, just because Waste Not does this kind of like snowballing thing that Shoulder doesn't.
That's got a price tag.
Yeah, Commander. I think I actually have one. I will donate one to the cause if you'll add it.
That's not something that's usually like a core concern, but I'm surprised.
So, I'm really glad this deck was functional at Vertex Philly. I'm super glad to hear someone 3-0 with it.
It was also interesting, they paired it with blue, which I think that's another cool thing about it. Like,
yes,
you have multiple options for what like a secondary color would be here.
I love when an archetype is entirely contained in a color, because then you're not usually going to draft mono that. You're going to have that plus some other stuff. And what I was going to say is that I think the discard plan specifically, a lot of decks suffer on the draw here, and this one especially, just because I have had games where my opponent did their thing and they just had no cards in hand, and it was like, okay, well, now my discard spells do nothing. Like, it's different than your spells being worse because they're a turn behind. It's like, well, now I have to like make you draw cards before my spells do anything. Like, if they just pass Hellbent, it feels bad. So thinking of pairing that with something that is complementary, that maybe is especially good on the draw, or has play on the draw, would be the one thing I would think of for this deck. Like, Disruptor Flute is a card I would love for this deck because it suffers so much on the draw,
right?
And any kind of turn 0 interaction is something I'm going to take very highly. I'll also come back to Gemstone Caverns, but I know, is that in here now finally?
It's not. I forgot in the last update, but that's definitely something on I threw a couple cards in
that
the Discord.
One also has a price tag. I'm begrudged to mention to you.
I was just shocked here. Just literal sticker shock. It exists for a reason.
Anyway, that's my feelings about the deck. I'm so glad that it's viable, and sounds like maybe you're committed to like sticking with this deck as an archetype for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think as long as it's viable, I'm excited about it.
And if any way to like bolster it, I would be looking at ways to make it suffer a little less on the draw, which are universal things like Disruptor Flute, and also just more wheelie things. Like, is Dark Deal in here? Did we talk about adding Dark Deal? That's the Wheel of Fortune, but you each draw one less.
I believe it is in here. I think I've played it last time I played the cube.
Cool.
I did draft this archetype. Yes, I will echo the issues that you mentioned of being on the draw. Specifically, one part that was a little frustrating is that when I was able to successfully disrupt my opponent, whether I was on the draw or play or draw, I played my discard spells and I managed to disrupt their plan. But then my Megrim and Liliana Scaras didn't really do anything. It was hard to find the mana to play them before I played my discard spells, because it's so punishing. And even if I did, I do 2, 4, 6 damage, and then they don't have any cards in hand. Even my Dark Deal is not going to deal any damage to them. So I really struggled to close out the game, and those did not feel like good way of doing so.
Interesting.
They felt more like almost combo piece when you assemble the best version of that deck that you're describing, or maybe it's more like a Deceiver Exarch to go with Wheel of Fortune.
Sure.
To just kill them in one go, rather than a win condition for the discard deck.
The other place, I agree with you completely. I think the other place they do work too is just out of the sideboard against the like cycling decks, where it's like it doesn't even matter. Maybe I don't even have a discard deck, but I just saw you cycle 11 cards on turn 1,
which
so
does happen.
It genuinely happens, and then you just bring this in, and it makes their whole deck much harder. Like, really puts the screws down on them. But you're totally right, I think. And I know another card. This is going to be just a replay of some other cards I know I've mentioned before. I think
Memory Jar?
Memory Jar would be so sick.
I was going to
here.
say, like, that's on this list, and that definitely fits the bill of make somebody discard cards, but also you don't, like, really refill their hand. Although, no, I mean, if they cycle a bunch of cards, they still have to discard their hand at the end, so it's like...
Yeah. I mean, Memory Jar and the Megrims would just be a great combo that you could kind of slot into any deck.
Yeah, the goal would really be, like, even like refilling the hand doesn't really matter because we're talking about just killing them in that
right. Yeah,
like, I mean, Shieldred, as mentioned, I think would be a good finisher for the Black discard deck. It is. I think overall, it's a card that's quite slow for this cube. It is 2 mana. If your opponent is on 20 life when you play it, and they have a cycling deck and they cycle 8 times and then they kill you, they're at 4. Like, it didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like...
Probably made your opponent feel really good for beating Shieldred while cycling 8 cards.
Yeah. Or maybe they need to cycle more than that, but like they can see a lot of cards before they hit their removal spell. They don't need to have it in hand. It's not like when you're playing it in other cubes or constructed format where when it shows up, you're at 12 life, and every turn that you don't draw your removal spell, you take 4 damage and plus the 2, so 6, and it's like you're more often than not just die if you don't have it right away. You actually have a lot more time in the Turbo Cube, or rather you are able to see a lot more cards before you die to the Shieldred.
Yeah, also, I mean, in most Magic, being a blocker really matters, and here it barely matters. So part of what Shieldred does in regular Magic is it says not only are you on a clock to find a removal spell, but also you really aren't in most cases going to be able to just alpha strike me either, because now I have a fantastic blocker that is also gaining me life. So it does things in other formats that I think contribute to its grown-worthiness that I don't think are really going to be a factor here. And it's basically just a better Megrim that can also kill your opponent once they are hellbent, because you can just attack them for 4, which is, I think, a nice spot to be.
That's fair. I mean, I think you're talking me into that and Memory Jar as well, because like Memory Jar costs real mana here, so even though it's kind of a broken effect, I'm less worried about that. One of the big things I really don't like about Shieldred is just it's really good against all of the red removal here. There's very little that does 5 damage, and that makes it scary.
There are quite a few that exist now that do
this is
5
the Pro
damage.
Tour knowledge we need. There's no way I could look up this information.
Well, you can what is there? Roast, that's not a new one.
Roast, okay.
Scorching Shot is double red, so maybe not the best. Witch Stalker Frenzy would be most of the time 2 mana, but you could discount it to 1 sometimes if you want to encourage attacking. I guess that's I'm literally just thinking about the cards that I had in my constructed deck at the Pro Tour, but
good enough.
He knows those cards really well. While we're on this subject, I will mention a wheel that is maybe conspicuously absent here, which is Echo of Eons, which would also...
Is that the one that has, like flashback for 3, but you can...
Cast it for 6.
Cast it for 6.
Or 3 here. 4 here, rather.
That'd be cool.
That one also would
be very good, I think.
Yeah.
That one here is a time twister. It shuffles your graveyard back into your library and goes again.
It's like we're talking about like, oh, what if we dilute the most broken stuff that you can do here? And then it's like, let's add a bunch more wheels. This will be fine. That
one's interesting, though, because how many ways are there actually to discard a card from your hand? It's only really
That's a really good point,
if you are casting it from the graveyard, and that's not an effect I'm otherwise looking for in this cube for any reason, so I actually don't know how many ways there are to discard it. Casting on the front end would be, I think, fairly costed for that effect here, and then getting the flashback side would be great, but it feels like you're jumping through some hoops in a cube where Wheel of Fortune is already in here, and already great, but, putting it in probably a better color. Blue's a stronger color in this cube in general, I would say. But
yeah, that's a really great point, and I think that's come up in a few other cases as well. So I'd be curious just to do a little deep dive on how much discard outlets are in the cube, and that might be a great starting point, like a Scryfall search to look for more cards to expand it. So I think that's a great idea. One other question about this, how do you feel about breaking Singleton for more cards? I know it feels maybe a little bit backwards to be like, we're trying to promote more deck diversity, but then is adding duplicates maybe a way to actually do that just by reinforcing some of those decks that really depend on key cards, like Waste Not, for example, or Disruptor Flute being really important disruption?
want to hear Julian's take on this, but for the listener, I do want to clarify that you are currently breaking singleton for Jade Mage.
Yes.
And exactly Jade Mage.
Because Jade Mage is important.
There are 3 copies of Jade Mage in this cube, which is
a key card to I don't know what, but
your guy's Cradle deck. It's one of the only mana sinks, honestly, in the cube.
It's fine.
Also
Don't worry about it.
It's also the worst one, but it's one of the only ones. The other ones that are there are even better.
As much as possible, when I build a cube, if I want redundancy in an effect, I like to have different variation of it, not necessarily like specifically different names, but something that's like a payoff for a strategy, like 2 slightly different payoff, because it will just add variety to games in the ways that they behave, in the ways that you're able to interact with them, and not have the same repetitiveness. I think
that's absolutely true, but I just wonder when we get into a corner in a space where it's like, Waste Not is very unique. There's nothing really quite like it. So
to me, I would only break singleton for those extreme cases where I just cannot find an alternative, basically. And I would probably want to limit it to 2 copies of the card, depending, maybe 3 makes sense depending on like how big the cube ends up being. But once you start having 3 copies of the same card in a deck, you're really just gonna have like every game that you play on that cube night be about that one card without having to necessarily even have any tutors for it. And that doesn't inspire me, at least.
Totally, yeah.
I think your breaking of singleton in this cube for Jade Mage is exactly one of those kinds of like funny style choices that I actually really like.
It's very stylish.
And the reason I think it works here is because Jade Mage sucks. Like it's still
shut up. It's fine.
It's still not
solid
very good.
D+.
It's a D+ in this cube, and I think that both makes it stylish and also forgives anybody that would be like mad their opponent has Jade Mage every game, because it's Jade Mage. You're not gonna be mad about it.
That's fair.
I love Waste Not. I think that in multiples could get toxic kind of quickly.
Okay.
It's also better in multiples too. Like your second
that's a great
Jade Mage
point.
is worth nothing. I mean, it's
literally nothing. Like
it's
there's 3 in the
removal.
cube. If you want one of them in your deck, you don't want 3 of them. You just want 2.
The Waste Nots stack in a way that is very powerful. Those were by far my best starts in my discard deck that I'm thinking of. I know I also specifically advocated for adding Overeager Apprentice, but I had some other ritual effect or eggs or something. The best turns were when I went Waste Not into discard spell, and then that often meant I could generate more mana to go do more stuff that turn. And I'm just imagining games where you go like Waste Not into discard spell and just run away with things in a really messed up manner. Or honestly, just have that first sequence happen more often might be pretty annoying to play against. So I don't know. I don't feel great about breaking singleton for Waste Not. I will also throw another vote out there, though, for there is the creature version of it that cares about you discarding, not your opponent.
Right, and
which
also costs like 5.
It costs 5. I think it's worth it here for the effect, to be honest.
I agree. I actually had it on my list of cards to add.
Do you know the name of it?
Bone Miser.
Thank you.
I know it because I drafted it at a practice draft because it's a special guest in the most recent set.
Ah, I see. There you go.
And there's a self-discard theme in that set, so...
And Bone Miser is funny here because it's not redundancy for Waste Not in the sense that it doesn't actually do the same thing kind of at all, except that it goes with all the same cards. If you're playing a deck with wheels or with mutual card draw effects or something, like I think you could even get away with maybe playing Wheel and Deal here, which is my favorite like off the beaten path wheel. It's like a windfall that also draws you a card. It's a cantrip and windfall for 4 mana, which would be 2 mana here. But it's only for 1 player. It's not symmetrical actually, that one, which is kind of an interesting detail of it.
It's opponents only.
Oh, it's just opponents. You can't do it to yourself.
Yeah, no, that would be very good to asymmetrical Wheel of Fortune.
Okay,
card.
Sure. It sounds pretty good now that you say it that way. Good point. Your Pro Tour card evaluation skills really coming in handy.
It reads, I mean, it might be fine, but it reads really just a combo card with like a Shieldred or Oakish Bowmaster kind of card.
Yeah, if it's in that space. I guess that doesn't do anything with Bone Miser, though. Nothing at all.
Yes, because Bone Miser is only your discard, right?
Yes.
Another similar thing, like something I'm realizing as we're talking through this, is the cube does not necessarily have a big enchantment theme. There are just a couple that are pretty key, but there aren't a lot. So rather than actually breaking singleton, I could just go up on a couple enchantment tutors, but I think they would probably be getting attunement more than anything else.
Trade routes is what I'm going to get with it every time.
I mean, that's cool. If it's trade routes, I'm in.
Tutors are slow. Like, I don't know which one you have in mind. I guess, I mean, maybe
Idyllic Tutor is just get an enchantment.
yeah,
right?
I guess that one is not too bad, but it's in a different color, and we were talking about how like being in the play is so important for the black discard deck, and spending time to tutor your waste node and then cast your waste node and then have the discard spell all on turn 1 seems pretty difficult to achieve. So you will usually just have to fire off your discard spell rather than be able to tutor your waste node first. So it definitely wouldn't be too strong. I think it might be a little weak, honestly, at least regarding to that strategy.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think Idyllic Tutor is kind of cool here specifically because it costs 3 and therefore only 1. Like, I think everyone's first thought, like, oh, a tutor for an enchantment, like Enlightened Tutor. That one's bad here. And Idyllic Tutor is, I mean, if you care about enchantments, just better because it goes right to your hand and costs the same amount of mana. I think that one's cool because it's like just a nod to the stylistic choice of the cube. But I agree with Julien that I would not think of that as bolstering this deck at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through all the enchantments and thinking, like, what are the things that are actually worth getting? And it's like, Heliod, Suncrowned, if I have a combo to kill you, or Attunement, if that's also part of my combo-y thing.
Molten Nursery.
Maybe Molten Nursery or Tameo meets the Story Circle, and then, like, honestly, then having the flexibility of, yeah, I have it here to get my combo, but sometimes I get an Oblivion Ring, because I just absolutely need that.
Fastbond, too, is a very singular
Fastbond.
Effect that...
I do think Fastbond is cool here.
I mean, the card is, I think, undeniably cool, frankly.
I did actually, so another change that we made recently was adding a single bounce land. I think it's the blue-green bounce land, and people were playing that in their Fastbond decks, which was very cool.
Exactly what I suggested. I feel so good about
that
myself.
You are totally validated for including that one bounce land.
I love being validated!
Yeah, it looks like just a generally good addition to the cube for sure.
Okay.
The only caveat is the one you mentioned. If there is one enchantment that's just too generically good, Attunement may be crossing that line.
Yeah, and honestly, like, Heliod really is just a combo piece at this point. Like, I don't see it being used in multiple interesting ways, so maybe the answer is, like, put in an Idyllic Tutor and cut that.
I wouldn't miss Heliod.
Okay.
And I actually got to see Dave combo off with it, which I almost never see people actually pull off the combo in this cube. And I just got to have the experience of watching him explain the combo to somebody that never seen it before.
That's
and
not
just,
great.
Which, I mean, this is true of basically all combos, where it's like, he's like, I do this thing once. And they're like, okay. He's like, I do it again. And they're like, okay.
Are you sure?
And he's like, I now do it as many times as I need to, and then you're dead. They're like, oh, so I just die? And they're like, he's like, yeah. And they're like, okay. And then, it's like,
I guess
it's always a little deflating to, have somebody have to experience that, firsthand.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of breaking Singleton, another card that I've been tempted to break Singleton with is Tireless Tracker. Like, speaking of the bounce land and like the landfall and Fastbond deck in general, Tireless Tracker is just such a singular card in this environment because it just gives green decks like the power to actually draw a bunch of cards. How would you feel about that? Or is there like
just
something...
play Green Sun Zenith.
Oh, okay, problem solved.
Glad I could help. I think Green Sun Zenith is very cool here, and in a lot of decks would serve as redundancy for a card like Tireless Tracker, but also is a genuine toolbox. There are really good green answers in this cube that are creatures, so I think that card just makes a lot of sense here.
Okay, we're at like 3 cards. This is great.
Also, Green Sun Zenith, genuinely, unless your opponent has a way to make you draw instant speed, can keep you from milling out ever.
How does it do that?
It shovels itself back in when it
right.
resolves. You draw it every turn, you
Yeah,
keep casting it,
I
and it
always
keeps
forget about
shoveling
that
back in.
aspect.
Which is, I mean, not nothing. That's some decks win condition.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's almost a downside here. Like, I think I've done a pretty good job in terms of, like, this is a weird cube. It's going to take some effort to figure out what's going on. But at cube events, there have been, like, really not a ton of rules confusion. Like, I expected after the first CubeCon where it was played that everybody would be like, all kinds of messed up stuff happened. Like, we'd miss triggers. There was one problem.
Oh, man, it was so messed up.
There was one problem, which was Drakehaven. We cut that immediately. Problem solved. The only other like rules issue that came up consistently was people were trying to cycle from other zones, and I was like, "Huh."
That's still crazy to me.
It's very funny.
Not a thing I would ever think to do.
Bones was like, "This just came up again
is it
and
just
again."
Galvanic Relay? That's the one place I can maybe understand it because it's kind of almost
There
like
are
your
a couple
hand.
other similar cards, but that's a big one for sure.
Were people shuffling from their graveyard? Or you say other zones? Was it anything but Exile?
I think it might have been graveyards. I don't know. Oh, you cast Yawgmoth's Will. Can I cycle these? No, you can't.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
I see it like with all those red impulse. It's just like, yeah, you can play. They're like in my hand until the end of turn, right?
Right.
That's kind of like the mental shortcuts that you do, and they're not. They're not, and you have those restrictions attached to that.
Yeah, it's weird. So adding something like Green Sun Zenith, I'm just thinking like, okay, there is like a really good opportunity to miss triggers here, and that's definitely something I want to be cautious of.
Just getting people will forget to shuffle it back in.
But by people, I mean this people.
Skill issue. Get good.
Yeah.
I think people. That's a very common. I mean, for what it's worth, it is a very played card. That
is a fair point. Like a lot of the cards here are weird cards nobody's seen before, but
like,
that is not.
Even like Red Sun Zenith, which is the same cycle, I would expect more people to not remember to shuffle in. But Green Sun Zenith is a card I think people are used to playing with.
That's a fair point.
Especially since it's now unbanned in Modern.
Yeah, we knew that.
I know that. For sure.
But before that, it hadn't really seen any like competitive play in a long time. But
the last episode of the podcast, we got a bunch of feedback. One piece of feedback, as you might expect, a bunch of people saying Mandibular Kite is cool.
I'm excited for the Mandibular Kite is cool t-shirt that everybody's going to show up with because, wow.
The other piece of feedback is that Psychic Frog is definitely playable in Modern, and how could you not know that? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I guess the YouTube algorithm is recommending me more Bosch and Roll videos than Aspiring Spike videos these days. Yeah. My bad.
Not to go on too long of a bird walk here, but you often tell me, like, people love you on the show, Anthony. Like, people enjoy hearing you, and I'm the heel, and I'm like, no, that can't be true. Everybody thinks you're cool, and then everybody is just like, you're wrong, Mandibular Kite is cool, and I'm like, oh no.
No, I mean, you're clearly the lovable one, and I'm clearly the heel. It's fine.
Not true.
I accept my role.
All right, bird walk over. Magic cards.
I have a list of cards if
Excellent.
you want to look at it.
I also have a list of cards of just like stuff that actually this is a lot of stuff that Andy has recommended. A couple other things I've thrown on here.
I also put whatever you posted publicly in the Discord. I added to this list as well. I'm not sure if you have other things you've thought of since then.
I'm not sure which was in which list, so we'll have to see.
The listeners have not seen any of the lists, so we might as well just hit these cards up.
One of the aspects that I was thinking about when looking for cards for this cube is specifically cards that are good on the draw and ways of interacting and stopping those turn one win. Because if you have ways to punish those, that will force those decks to adapt and be more multidimensional, be able to be more resilient, and not be able to dodge all the problems by winning the die roll, like sometimes they're able to against decks like the discard deck or the hate beer deck. So we have mentioned a couple like Disruptor Flute, which I think is already in the queue, but it's great, but like more card in that vein. So I was looking through the Leyline cycle, because those are effective. You have Leyline of Sanctity. I'm not sure exactly how much that disrupts things.
Not a whole lot. So that would just stop anything that targets. I mean, it would honestly stop the discard deck a fair amount.
There's like either Flux Reservoir, but if you're drawing your whole deck, you can probably find a solution to the Leyline as well. So maybe that's not the way to go. You have Leyline of Singularity. That could be... It sounds more like a sideboard card against a deck that would be making a lot of tokens. And the main obvious one is Leyline of Anticipation that would allow you to play a counter spell, like play a neg during your opponent's turn, so you can play a counter spell when they're trying to combo off.
It's a really interesting idea. So it just lets you cast things with flash. It starts in play, but you still don't get a land. So you have to find some way to do things, whether that means I'm just like casting free spells, like free blockers, or like you say, if you have other sources of mana that isn't lands. I'm sure we've talked about this card before, and I've been a little bit hesitant about it.
We have on the show at least.
Maybe we haven't, but I feel like you got me in a mood to be willing just to try stuff out, and that kind of like need to have sort of like multiple pieces to actually make that Leyline work is pretty appealing to me. So I think that's an interesting idea.
What is your hesitation around it? Is your main concern that it would just be too good?
I don't know.
It's just the vibes are off for you.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm worried about is that it would allow for a turn 0 win. Potentially.
Honestly, I'm not worried about that at all. If you get to pull off a turn 0 win with no land drop, you earned it.
Yeah, that's also what I was thinking.
Handshake and go submit the match slip.
You're down a card because you play the Leyline, and also your lands are completely useless. That's very difficult to pull off. It sounds to me more like a cool side quest rather than like something you can reliably pull off in any kind of problematic way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my feeling is it's pulling in a lot of risky directions. One is maybe it just makes the combo decks way better, but also maybe it sets people up to be like, oh, I have this like really powerful way to interact on turn 0, but then it sets them up for failure if they don't actually get all the pieces they need to make that work. Like, and then the fact that if you draw it after your opening hand, which might happen very quickly if you're cycling a bunch of cards, that could just lead to some like bad feelings. But yeah, I mean, I think that all of that is a lot of unknowns and speculation, so it's probably worth giving a try.
I think I share some of your like weird vibes-based hesitations around it. Just that I'm not sure it actually really serves the goal we're describing because so much other stuff has to go right. Like,
right.
If anything, I think it's just maybe kind of a trap for someone to look at it and think, this will protect me on turn 0. It's like, only if you have it in your opening hand and you're on the draw and also you have a way to produce mana and the piece of interaction you need relevantly, which will happen sometimes? Probably. But I will say one thing I like for it is that I don't think it's that bad to draw it later and just cast it. Like, playing at instant speed is just good here, I think, in general. Mm-hmm. Your opponent not having a chance to know what you're going to do and being able to use sorcery speed interaction at instant speed, I think is not quite worth a card, but it isn't the normal, well, this is a dead card that you get from playing with ley lines in a lot of formats where it wants you, if it's not your opening hand, you'd rather just not be in your deck at all.
Sure. What else you got?
We mentioned it before, but I think Gemstone Cavern is probably like the even more ideal version of Leyline of
for
Anticipation.
Sure. So this is just if you're on the draw, you can start with it and play is basically the mechanic here.
And it produces all colors, which it doesn't do normally.
So because
makes a lot of sense.
It makes it not really possible to get those turn 0 win, and it kind of like suffice all by itself with just any instant speed interaction to disrupt your opponent. So that is good. One card that I think would be probably just generally very strong in the cube is Mindbreak Trap.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about this, and I forgot to put this on my list.
Yeah, free counterspell. That one's great. I will say I have one complaint about this card. For those that don't know, this is a counterspell that costs 2 blue, and says you can free cast it if your opponent casts their 3rd spell this turn.
Is it only the 3rd, or it's any after?
Any after.
As long as it casts 3, yeah.
It costs 0, and you can exile any number of spells on the stack, I think. So you would be able to like exile all the copies of like a Tendrils of Agony, for example.
I love this here. I have one complaint about this card, which is that it looks blue, but it's not blue, and everyone that's not playing blue will probably overlook it in the pack the first couple times they play with it. But there's no real way around that other than maybe telling people ahead of time, hey, read Mindbreak Trap.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like it'll be one of the top cards in the cube, below like the best payoffs, but I don't think that's a problem.
I think it's nice to have some interaction that is, what's the highest piece of interaction in terms of picks right now? I mean, probably one of the hate bears, but if it's like actual proactive, get rid of your stuff, like what's the best card in the cube right now?
Pro Tour Expert?
I'm honestly thinking like Break Open, like the one that gives you mana, while also destroying an artifact. Crack Open.
It's sorcery. Like it
is sorcery. It makes it a lot worse.
I mean, Force of Will is always good. Like it just.
Yeah, it's probably Force of Will. Yeah.
I haven't looked at it. We don't have the whole list exactly in mind, but it
Force of Vigor is also. I mean, honestly, all the Force cycles probably in contention.
Force of Will just looks a lot better to me. It's just like. It's not narrow like Force of Vigor is. Like sometimes you have your opponent may play a bunch of artifacts, but they're not artifacts that are good to destroy. Maybe they're playing a literally artifact deck, but all they're playing eggs and guild globes and Psy. And like, what are you gonna do with your Force of Vigor? It just doesn't work really.
Yeah.
Where Force of Will just deals with everything.
Yeah. Force of Despair also contextually very strong here. Obviously, only certain decks will care about it, but yeah, those are probably like the premier interaction, and I would personally, if I were you, would love to have a couple more like big standouts.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Toxic Deluge also honestly stands out to me a little bit as a like premier piece of interaction.
That is true, yeah.
Because you can often make that one-sided in this cube, and at only 1 mana, it can be quite strong.
I think Mindbreak Trap would be the source to Plowshare of the Turbo Cube. Clearly
makes sense to me. The blue Swords to Plowshares, we finally found it.
The best interaction spell in the cube, way above rate, but at the end of the day, still a 1-for-1 and not really problematic because of that, because of that ceiling. All right, so I looked at the Chancellors. It seemed like only Chancellor of the Annex might be worthy of a consideration.
I thought about that one too. It just kind of says like your opponent has to throw away a card though. Like it doesn't actually stop them aside from just saying like waste your first spell, because you can just let it get countered and be like, all right, fine, well, I don't care about that one.
It also doesn't work with, if your opponent has a 1 mana spell, it just does literally nothing.
I don't think so, actually. It's a trigger, right?
Oh, sorry, it's not an additional cost, it is a separate trigger.
Yes.
Okay.
That reason right there is actually a good reason maybe not to include it too, because it will introduce potential complexity over whether or not it's discounted.
It is a trigger, and which is why you can throw away a spell, and like I play my 0 mana spell, trigger.
Right.
I don't pay. I play my second 0 mana spell. It resolves.
Yeah. I played that one a lot in the Degenerate Microcube, and what it means practically is like, okay, just waste a spell. Like, just, throw away something because you mostly, I mean, in fast formats, you can't afford to pay an extra one for your first spell you care about, so you just don't. You just throw away a spell, which could be something, but feels less impactful than what we just talked about otherwise for the turn 0 interaction to me.
All right, next I have Ravenous Trap on the list of free interaction. That one might be a little narrow and on the sideboard card spectrum, but it is like Underworld Breach is a card that's in the cube that is extremely strong, and that could be like a good way of interacting with that like the Mindbreak Trap can be played out of any deck.
Yeah, that could be interesting. So it exiles a graveyard if they've had 3 cards go to the graveyard, which is situationally relevant sometimes.
It feels kind of sideboardy, but it'll be very good out of the sideboard. It's good against Underworld Breach, good against Yawgmoth's Will, and there's a lot of like getting one little dinky thing back. I mean, a couple of the combos you use the graveyard.
That's a good point.
The Synod Sanctum combo uses the graveyard, so you could just you use that at the right moment to disrupt that combo.
I could see main decking it in a deck that's maybe more controlling and more specifically interested in having many interaction spells.
It'd be good if you put Echo of Eons in there too, because you can just make that out do a thing if you get priority before they cast it.
I think that's pretty much all I found when it came to like really way of breaking serve.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge, and there just aren't a ton of cards in the history of Magic that fit this need, because Magic isn't supposed to work this way. We kind of broke it, but that's okay. If I could jump in and ask you guys about 2 cards, there are 2 cards that have come out in the last couple of years that generally it's like I'm okay to just put very powerful stuff in here, and you're going to go crazy with your Monastery Mentors and your Chrome Host Siege Sharks. There are 2 that I've avoided because I think they are just too strong and will just take over the game. And these are Geralf the Fleshwright, which is a creature that whenever you cast a spell, you make a zombie, and then you make all your zombies bigger. So it's like Monastery Mentor, but everything keeps the counters, and it just seems like so much to track. And the other one is Forensic Gadgeteer, which is it's got all this text on it, like it's creature types and power and toughness, but none of that matters. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you investigate, which just means you're drawing a card for every single artifact, and it even does some cost reduction, but just like both those cards just seem very, very broken to me. Do you think either of them would be appropriate? Or do you think it's like reasonable to be a little bit cautious about some of the payoffs that we have in the cube?
Forensic Gadgeteer looks extremely strong to me. It just like it really like pays you off really well for something that's already really strong.
Right.
You also, if you only draw a couple cards off it, you're still like not unhappy of having it in your deck. Like it really needs to be the last card you draw before it becomes not good. Reading Geralt the Fleshwright, it reads a lot weaker to me.
Really? I think for me it's like a combination of it seems both very strong and difficult to track that kind of pushes me over the edge of being pretty hesitant about it.
Yeah, I totally see the difficult to track. Like honestly, that in of itself, if you're not vibing with that, then that's enough of a reason not to include it in my opinion. But yeah, I don't think it's that strong because of it's just a bunch of ground creatures. Like you're gonna pass a turn and your opponent's gonna be able to do their own combo, do their sweeper, do their I guess if they're really big, then you might struggle to do like the conditional sweepers, like Toxic Deluge is not usually a conditional sweeper, but it might be in this case.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It probably would work most of the time.
I agree that I think Geralf is like interchangeable with the other ones in terms of power level. It's fine. I don't think it would be a problem. I also agree that it seems like a nightmare to track, and I think that's a good enough reason not to include it. Forensic Gadgeteer is interesting to me because Shahorva is in this cube, which costs a whole mana more, which is double, and it's also a gold card. Though I will say that I think color is a suggestion here because you're always taking off-color eggs if you get them. There's a lot of ways to filter mana to produce a sort of splash here and there. And I found Shahorva to be very replaceable here, and I wonder if that effect at 1 mana jumps all the way from replaceable to broken, or if it just becomes very strong. And I don't know. I think maybe my hesitation with that one is just that like blue gets so many of these like giant card draw spells that like if that were in another color randomly, I'd be more drawn to like trying it out. But the blue decks are so good at digging through their entire deck. I don't know that that's the kind of place you need to be looking to add cards.
For sure, yeah.
I do just really want someone to try and do that against Mayhem Devil, though. So that alone makes me excited about it.
Interesting. Yeah, Mayhem Devil in this cube has been a card to play against, for sure.
That's a pretty recent addition, too, because I remember that was a suggestion of mine.
Yeah.
Have you played against it? Have you felt the pain?
I feel the pain. It's especially
good.
like with Tireless Tracker is a similar situation where it's like,
Yep.
I want to crack all these, but how am I going to navigate? Like, I'll do maybe a couple on your
just gotta
turn,
do enough
maybe
to
a couple
your
on
Tower
my
Tracker
turn.
killed, yeah.
Yeah.
Because your Tower Tracker, it never dies, right? Because it always gets the counter.
No, but if they have some other incidental damage or you want to get into combat, like it still matters. What else you got on your list?
All right, I've got Repurposing Bay.
Repurposing Pay?
Bay. It's the new artifact birthing pod. It benefits from the Turbo Cube rules a lot by essentially costing only a single blue mana to play and nothing to activate.
This is an interesting card. It's basically like a kind of tinkery effect.
It's not cheating mana.
There's something we need to address about this card here, which this is a card from, what's it called? Go Fast Guys? Aether Drift. And I'm really not feeling that set in a lot of ways, but maybe if any cube of mine is going to be the right place to put fast cars, it is the Turbo Cube.
Look, I don't love the car flavor either, but I gotta say, this is one of my favorite arts from this set. Like, the art style is sick, even though it does feature a car. So.
I'm just being pulled in so many directions here.
I do have, I think, 2 more cars from this set on my list.
2 more cars from the set?
This set has a lot of stuff for this kind of theme. It's got artifacts going on. It's got a lot of activated abilities and stuff. I think Repurposing Bay would be very strong. I'm also just immediately thinking, what are the ways to untap this? Is there a way I can build like a chain and work my way up to a certain mana value? I don't know if there's anything in the cube. I would have to look at it and think about it. But I think it's a very cool, unique effect. Like compared to Forensic Gadgeteer, I think it might be about as powerful possibly. This one maybe has the downside of being a little more samey in that, well, you still have to find this card, so probably not. But the games we resolve this might be kind of rote after that point. But so cool and would enable a different kind of deck.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. Another small concern is just doing repeated tutors. Gameplay can already be a little bit slow here. But yeah, I think it's worth giving it a try regardless of that.
All right, so more cards from Aether Drift. I have Monument to Endurance.
I heard about this on a different podcast.
This one would be great. And also, I don't think we'll offend your sensibilities aesthetically.
It's got to, I love shapes, and this is basically just a bunch of shapes. So, Monument to Endurance, 3 mana artifact. Whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen. You either draw a card, make a treasure, or each opponent loses 3 life. So...
It's his turn. You don't get everything only once.
Right, yeah. So...
It's a mini bone miser.
Play this for one and then if I can discard 3 cards, I get my mana back, I draw a card, and bolt my opponent. Yeah, that seems pretty cool. Do you think it's worth paying a mana for that?
I mean, you can play your land, play it, and cycle for 0 mana, and you get the treasure right away.
Right, yeah. Good point.
I think it is. It's kind of weirdly feels like maybe not a build around in this cube because there's already kind of you're going to want to play a bunch of cycling cards either way, and you don't need a lot to trigger a lot for it to be worth it. And if you're going hardcore on the cycling, Shadow of the Grave kind of thing, it's maybe not enough, kind of because it's you only get 3 effect on one turn, 3 effect on your opponent's turn, and if you're just trying to kill them on turn 1, it'll be nice to have. You'll play it in your deck, but it's not going to be your win con, your main win con at least, that you're hoping for.
Yeah, and I kind of like the idea of if the format does slow down a little bit, then this becomes a card that's more about a continued draw engine or continued value engine that you're going to use over the course of a longer game.
It would help the deck fight through some disruption without having the deck be completely shut down by something. Next one I have is Boom Mobile.
Probably Boommobile, right?
Boommobile? I
think probably.
I don't know.
I'd say Boommobile, but
Boommobile.
Boom Mobile's my new cell carrier.
That's the introduction. If I can't get this other introduction I've been working on lined up. Switch to Boom Mobile. Daha! I tricked you! Did I sell it in the intro? How was my acting? We don't have a sponsor for this show. Lucky Paper cannot be bought, though I did realize when I was making this introduction that Boom Mobile is a real mobile carrier. It actually exists, it seems, according to their website. So I'm just here to say that we are not sponsored by Boom Mobile, and in fact, none of you should ever buy Boom Mobile. Don't give them any money under any circumstances. This is anti-advertising. Lucky Paper cannot be bought!
So, Boom Mobile is 2 red for a 5/5 artifact vehicle. When this vehicle enters, add 4 mana of any color, spend it only to activate abilities. That's interesting. An exhaust, this vehicle deals X damage to any target, put a counter on this vehicle. So you get a bunch of mana, and then you can immediately punch something. One time, is that what exhaust does? Activate it
Yes.
only once. Tell me about why you think this is a cool card.
I think it would be a good card. Whether it's a cool card is more of up to you to decide.
Thank you for acknowledging that I am the arbiter of cool.
In this context. Yeah, I mean, it gets basically the double discount from the cube because the card itself costs less and the ability costs less, and the mana that it generates is not reduced. So it is a ritual and it is a win condition in your combo deck. It's not that difficult to be able to use the mana for activated abilities.
Is it?
I don't know.
I was starting to doubt myself as I was saying that.
The one I can think of off the top of my head is Lithoform Engine. Obviously, there are a ton of activated abilities here, but the hallmark of almost all of them is that they're all free with the restriction.
I think that it makes a lot of sense why you're suggesting this. I think the whole package of this being, really that restriction of only use it for abilities kind of just makes it, harder to evaluate than I'm interested in, I think.
It's definitely a little annoying to track. Even if it is good, then it definitely can make it difficult when you're going on to a long combo turn and you have to float your red mana and you red mana only for abilities.
All right, let's move on from Boom Mobile.
All right, if you want more Jade Mage but don't want multiple of the same name, probably because of playing around Maelstrom Pulse, you could add Sprout Swarm.
That's an interesting idea. Sprout Swarm is just broken here, right?
I don't think so.
Really?
I mean,
I think it is very similar to Jade Mage. It's harder to interact with because you can't just hit it with a removal spell, and it's better for that reason. But
it's probably better than Jade Mage because you get to the point where you don't have to spend mana on it anymore.
Yeah.
You can use your mana on other things and you keep making tokens.
I love this suggestion. I have 2 concerns.
It does kind of just turn into Jade Mage, doesn't it?
I have 2 concerns. My one concern is that this being an instant would just make infinity chump blockers that would be very hard to interact with because sorcery speed interaction is never going to hit them. You can just make them during the declare attacker step and then block with them. It might make decks without trample or evasion just hard locked out of the game, basically. The only other one is just it will be annoying for a lot of players to figure out how many saplings they can make because everyone reduces the cost of further ones, and there's another cost reduction mechanic on top of it.
It will also be annoying for people's opponents to be trying to figure out how many saplings they can make.
But I think those 2 costs might be worth Cube where Sprout Swarm is uniquely cool and broken. Could be fun.
That's any cube. When was the last time somebody seriously suggested putting Sprout Swarm in a cube?
It's 45 seconds ago.
It's probably not very playable in most cube.
Okay, I mean, if we're doing
the first one with buyback does cost
of
2-3 mana, right? Because it costs 5 with buyback.
Costs 5 in total, yeah.
So it costs 3 mana.
You don't have anything to convoke with it, but
you have some 0 mana creatures to convoke.
Okay, if we're gonna do a throw spaghetti at the wall draft,
that's some of my favorite spaghetti to throw at the wall. I'd be into trying this out.
Sprout Swarm spaghetti.
All right,
it's gonna make some really cool story moments where it's like I didn't
know how many saplings
I made
I could
100
make.
saplings.
I think it's easier to see how many saplings you can make in the context of the turbo cubes than it is with regular Sprout Swarm because you probably don't want to be spending your actual mana on it anyway. at least after you need to get started, but after you get going, and you just tap 3 to make one more.
Yeah, it also just goes infinite with Chatterfang, right? Because you get 2 tokens, then you can just convoke it.
No, because it costs 3.
See, I don't know how many saplings I
It
can make.
goes more complicatedly with Chatterstorm.
Yeah.
All you have to do is make a little simple web page that lets you plug in how much mana you have willing and how many
picture
untapped
of your
creatures.
board state, and we're going to use AI to figure out how many saplings.
No, it's very simple math. Just here's how many creatures you have.
No, we don't do simple math anymore, Andy. We're a stupid society, and we do stupid math.
All you do is plug those 2 numbers in. It tells you the maximum number of saplings you can make, and then
I could just write the algorithm on the back of the card. Flip it over.
Yeah, you just put a QR code over the
you
art.
should have a little like array of like 8 QR codes with 8 different web pages, depending on which card needs a calculator to figure out what it does.
I've legitimately thought about making a little app for the Turbo Cube that just has like mana counters, storm counters. I think a couple things like that already exist, but just making it a web page that I could put a QR code on that helper sheet would be kind of funny.
Honestly, that's like well within the vibes of the Turbo Cube to me. Like, I would not be mad to be calculating how many saplings I can make. I'd be like, this is exactly what I signed up for, and I'm here for it. Whereas in a regular cube, I'm very mad at that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mad at you for making me make that calculus cube designer. But here, it's like what I expected.
Would you make an edited version of the card where you replace the rule text with a QR code?
That's too far. We found the line.
It's kind of complicated with Gaia's Cradle, too. I guess you just wait to spend the Gaia's Cradle until you've made as many as possible, and then you spend the Gaia's Cradle mana.
Yes.
And then you make more.
And then you make more.
And then you make
And then
a
those
lot.
ones can still convoke. The Gaia's Cradle definitely makes it complicated. Have you considered intruder alarm for this cube?
Ooh. No?
I mean, I wouldn't actually play it. It would go infinite with Sproutsworn, but I probably wouldn't play it.
All right. What do we have next? Probably pretty narrow card, but thought it could lead to some fun decks, which is Wheel of Sun and Moon.
Wheel of Sun and Moon enchants a player, and if a card would be put into that player's graveyard, instead it goes on the bottom of their library. Tell me about that. It's just a combo piece, right? Like you're just doing this to yourself, and then...
Yeah, it would be...
It's also Grave Hate.
It can be Grave Hate, for sure. It would definitely kind of be like an Etherflux Reservoir style card. Like, once you've drawn your whole deck, you can use this as a win condition. Not literally just by itself, which is kind of like the part that I like about it. It's like you like have to make a little puzzle in deck building and making sure you have the right card, making sure you can keep going. Maybe that's a little too far, but depending on how hard it is to pull off. But I feel like if that's the way your combo deck wins, where you're able to infinitely recur everything in your deck, that feels very satisfying to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of Transplant Theorist has been a really key card for decks that are just trying to loop it, just like for 0 mana, lets you put specific things from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Or a lot of decks just like really, it's really important they have that one copy of Clear the Mind to recycle their graveyard one time. And this does a similar thing, but with a very different mana cost. So I'm not really sure how to evaluate it.
It also doesn't work. It needs to be in play before things start going back to the bottom of your deck. So unlike Clear the Mind, you wouldn't be able... You might need to have something else. It's definitely probably pretty weak overall, and there could be more. There's a bunch of variation on Transplant Theories if you want more of that effect.
Yeah, there's also Barkform Harvester from Bloomburrow was a similar kind of thing.
There's a card they do, like there's a bunch of variations on every set. I know because I look at every single one of them for the Degenerate Micro Cube, and they usually have huge toughness and very little power. I don't know why these things are linked. I mean, I guess it makes sense you're going to the late game, but like, I just want another win condition for my Mishra's Workshop decks, and I don't want it to be like a 0/6 or whatever. Something
else that's come up a bunch, or maybe not a bunch, but more than I expected, which was 0, was the 3-tree mascot being a wizard is very, because it's a changeling, is very relevant with cards that have wizard cycling, and so adding another changeling that has this like cycle your deck effect on it would be a lot.
I love having one or two of these effects here, and I think Clear the Mind and Transplant Theorist are my favorite versions because they care most about the sort of theme and novelty of the cube. Wheel of Sun and Moon cares not at all about it. I mean, like,
it also
it's not
literally
reduced
does
at
not
all.
get a discount. I think that's a good point.
And also, like, it doesn't, I mean, obviously, because you can take so many game actions, Wheel of Sun and Moon is better here for that reason, but it also doesn't care that anything else is discounted. It just, like, is a card. I think a question of how many you include here is interesting. I actually think this is maybe a whole topic for an episode, is the presence of this kind of deck. This, like, inevitability, get myself completely empty decked, and then I can just, like, start looping things. There was a lot of discourse in the thread for the 100 Ornithopter Cube because there was an online draft on Wednesday where Bones drafted a basically effectively creatureless deck and just won with Bow of Nylea. He did have 2 Ornithopters just because he ran out of playables, but he had no way to make them threats other than technically Vraska, but he never killed somebody with Vraska's emblem. No, I think Vraska, you need to give it power.
You need to give them power, yeah.
So yeah, he had no way to actually make the Ornithopter. Oh no, I guess Bow of Nylea gives you power and toughness. So he did have it in his deck, but that was not his strategy. His strategy was just mill everybody out with Bow of Nylea loops.
Did he do it?
He did.
He might be just angry about me drafting playing a match without playing any vehicles in a Ganjo Drift.
Let me be clear. The discourse was not coming from Bones. Bones was like, I did it. It was fun. I had a good time.
Okay.
And other people were like, this is the most miserable I've ever been playing a game of Magic in my entire life.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
How does it feel to have created that experience for people?
Oh, wow. Very powerful, I guess. Anyway, I think maybe that's a whole topic for an episode someday. Because very often you can make this deck a thing by adding one card.
Yeah.
You just add Transplant Theorist to Turbo Cube, you put Bow of Nylea in the 100 Ornithopter Cube, and all of a sudden, that's a whole dream to live. And whether or not that's a good dream or not, future episode maybe.
I wanted to talk about the lands from the cube, mana base.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially if we are scaling it up. I think the expectation would be we're also going to add more lands. What were you thinking about in particular?
So I was thinking about if you had considered cutting fetch lands and possibly the land cycling cards.
I had not.
So the reason why is that I'm thinking about that is it just adds a lot of time to shuffle, and we've mentioned before that the games from this cube can sometimes take a while. It's something that I look for in cubes where I don't want the fetch lands. If I don't feel like they don't serve a specific purpose. I mean, fetch lands are just so integral to Magic overall, but they have a lot of downsides that people like put up with, and if we are able to get rid of them in a cube context where it doesn't make for a worse experience in terms of having playable mana, I think that's a big upside in general.
Interesting. I mean, there are definitely some other cycles of lands or like types of fixing that do lean into the gimmick, like we talked about. The 5-color lands that are a filter land are kind of interesting. And I definitely agree. Like it slows down matches a lot, and I will have turns where it's like my opponent says go, passing to my turn 1, and I'm like, okay, before my draw step, I'm gonna like do a couple land cycling things and like make sure I get these lands out of my deck before I draw my first card and that kind of thing. But I also just do really like the land cyclers because the fact that they turn into fetch lands, that's become very core to my thinking about the cube.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, actually, is I personally would be in favor of cutting the fetch lands and keeping the land cyclers, because the fetch lands are no different here than they are anywhere else. They're great fixing. You take them with fetchables, and they're great. The land cyclers are uniquely incredible here because they cost no mana, so they just become free, instant speed, non-interactive land cyclers. You're making a tiny nerf to the landfall stuff by cutting the fetch lands, though not substantial, I don't think. Not enough to like make me rate Tireless Tracker any lower. But that seems like a reasonable middle ground to me, where you're going to take 10 cards out of the cube that shuffle all the time. And how many typed land cyclers do you have? Because I know you've gotten rid of most of the basic land cyclers.
Gotten rid of most of the basic ones, yeah.
I'd be surprised if there were 10 typed land cyclers left. So you're cutting it down by at least half, basically, to sort of limit the amount of shuffling and actually make games proceed to a reasonable end.
It's a really interesting idea. I do still kind of like the fetches for a couple reasons. I think having like some degree of cards that you're familiar with is valuable, and just being like, not literally everything is crazy wild stuff here. There's like, you can play a fetch land if you don't notice that the land cyclers work this way. There is also a little bit in green. There is Reminap Excavator, and there's a Crucible of Worlds, so there's definitely some green decks that are going to try and do stuff with the fetch land specifically, maybe with Fast Bond or Horn of Greed. Yeah, Horn of Greed is kind of important. I don't know. I mean, I could also do
Is
something...
Horn of Greed when you play a land, though? I think Horn of Greed doesn't work with the fetch lands.
Right. Yeah, it is just play a
So
land.
that's not made any better by fetch lands. It's just exactly the same.
Unless you're also doing the Crucible of Worlds.
That's true. If you're also doing Crucible of Worlds, that is true.
There might be some land that would be narrow ad that would work with that. The first one that comes to mind, which may not be the best one, is Lotus Field, because you can play it and psych it to itself. So if you're doing Fastborn Crucible stuff, that's a land that you can keep getting land drop with that. I mean, more bounce lands. But
yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I think that like rethinking the mana base a little bit is definitely going to happen. We did in the last updates. We added the Odyssey block filter lands that you pay 1 and get 2 mana, and that's been interesting because they're not super overpowered, and they definitely are a little bit more leaning into the flavor of the theme of the cube, and the fact that you do need to be able to spend both colors of mana is very relevant here in terms of like checking their power level. So yeah, maybe looking for some other opportunities for lands that feel like they're taking advantage of the theme more.
I don't mind also lands that are like very simple and maybe don't do that, but are just
fast
like
land cycle will be great
that's,
here. Like,
that's the one I would
getting to
That's
turn 4 anyway.
a fair point, yeah.
They're very rarely.
That is turbo feeling.
Yeah, they're fast lands.
yeah,
Fast right in the name.
exactly. No, but it's just like kind of like, I mean, fetch land, like everyone knows them, but you still have to take into account like, okay, so which fetch land do I have? Do I have a fetchable target? I'm drawing so many cards, I might not be able to, I need to remember if I have a fetchable target in my deck or not when I'm playing so few lands. It just like adds a little more to like the charge of things that you have to think about instead of like, yeah, I just drew a Seacrum Coast. Like that's it. That's all it does. And
Yeah, totally.
so there's definitely some lands that kind of, I was thinking about the stock land from Time Spiral that technically take advantage of the rule.
But still suck.
Well, no, I mean, they're good, but they're not, but maybe not in an interesting way because they're essentially perfect dual land. So just make both colors of mana. And
I was thinking of the storage lands, not whatever you said. What did you say?
The calciform pools, and so you can, if I remember correctly, you can just use them. You can just use them to make like right away the color that you want with like no downside. But you need to like go through a lot of steps to like understand that that's how they work, like as evidenced by this confusion.
Because you don't actually tap it to activate the second ability, which I didn't realize.
Yeah, that's like something that like very rarely come up in like normal Magic. I think it's only when you're like pretty badly color screwed. But yeah, so you could do that, which kind of like is like on power level like totally fine and takes advantage of the cube rule, but maybe in more of a confusing way rather than like fun way.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of reading for what amounts to basically a dual land with a little glitter.
I agree. I don't know. I think it's worth considering. Another like small detail is I do kind of like maybe it's not worth it. The kind of, here are the fetch lands, and you see them next to the land cyclers, and it sort of suggests to people like, look, here's the baseline, here's how it's kind of changed. But
I was going to ask if this was kind of like a Jason Mind Sculptor situation,
a little bit,
where you include them for the joke that they're actually not as good here as you would expect them to be.
Definitely. And I don't know if they even like need to be there for that to be communicated.
Well, you could keep them in a case next to the cube, but not put them in the cube. And then you could have people draft the cube and say, while you're doing that, look at these and think about how they're not that good here.
In between rounds, I would invite you to peruse the gallery of many jokes that I've designed about this cube. That's the real idea.
Cards to think about while you are drafting. Oko, Jason Mind Sculptor, Burton Catacombs.
I mean, maybe to a point, maybe it is time to, the joke has been made and we've played with the cube for a while now. Maybe a different joke.
It's time for a new joke.
Second Sunrise and similar effect, like face rewards, open the vault. If that's an archetype you want to put in, which I'm not
sure. So you're just talking about
to.
Gameplay that like takes too long and is frustrating, and you're saying I actually put in the eggs deck in here?
Yeah, why not?
I think those cards are so cool.
They are cool.
I love Face Reward and Second Sunrise. And there's so many like cool little edge cases for how you can like take advantage of them.
So my favorite thing about that is there are certain players that get really into this cube. The players that are really into like puzzly, complex sickos. And I can just imagine the face of the sickos when they open Second Sunrise and they're like, "Can I do this? Is this something I can do? What if we just put KCI in here too? That it can't be that far off."
Oh yeah, no, you could. I also had Tishar on my list.
Okay, so our goal was like, let's power this down a little bit. Let's make this a little bit more reasonable, and then we're just like, nah, actually, let's just put in all the most sicko mode.
No, but we already have more interaction. It's fine.
Right. We added Mindbreak Trap.
Mindbreak Trap forgives all sins.
Maybe that's a card
to
break singleton on.
Yes. Yeah, I mean. Maybe.
No. I don't think so. I think you just think down that path leads
got a hard veto.
I think that's a bad path to go down personally.
Probably yes.
The blue path to exile.
Was this helpful, Anthony?
This was really helpful. I mean, we got a small number of. We didn't get 100 unique cards to add to the cube, but also I think just enough like ideas of exploring more self-discard and thinking more about the themes of the cube that I might want to bolster a little bit. So I have like, if not specific cards, a bunch of Scryfall searches and searches like filters I want to do on the cube to just be like, hey, how much of this kind of thing, how much self-discard really is in this cube currently? So hopefully that'll give me the push for accountability. Thank you both for all your input and experience with this very silly cube.
I'm only a little mad that Julien came in and said the exact same things I've said multiple times about Shoulder and Memory Jar, and you were like, "No, you're kind of talking me into it." I mean,
right. Well, see, here's the thing. You know when somebody's like, "Oh, but like I loosened the jar for you," like that's what happened.
Well, I say I'm only a little mad about it.
You've been loosening the memory jar for a while, and it's finally I'm like, you know what? It's been a while since I've taken a little time from thinking about this, and I have fresh eyes, and I'm willing to finally acquiesce.
And that's why I'm only a little mad instead of furious. Mm-hmm. But I did want to offer humbly what I think will be the inverse moment, which is that another card that I think would be cool here, that I think Julien will agree with you would be completely egregious, is Nadu Winged Wisdom.
Yeah,
Julien,
absolutely egregious.
Julien, what do you think of Nadu Winged Wisdom in the Turbo Cube?
I'm pretty sure it's banned.
Yeah, I think it would be very good. That's for sure. I mean, I was thinking about it. I think there's like 7 of 8 equipments that would equip for free with it. So it is.
That's a lot of Shukos.
It's almost self-contained at this point, right? Like it's just like so easy to get
that
3 or 4 of those if you're prioritizing them. Yeah. Ring of Volcas, maybe not the most sought after card. So you might be able to wheel that one. Yeah, I mean, it would be extremely good, I think. Like, putting lands in play instead of just drawing the card is just so insane. Like, it just... Like, colored mana is so often the
choke point, or
the
like
choke, exactly, the choke point of your combo deck when it goes off. Like, of course, like, 2 colored mana of different colors is a big deal. But if that means you win the game when you get there, you're able to just put the resource to make it work. That being said, just throw it in there. See what sticks. I think it's actually kind of it's kind of a fun card. I've played it.
That's what I think too. It turns out I thought I was bringing this up so he could dunk on me for once, and instead he's like, actually.
Well, I do. I mean, I think when you first brought it up, you thought it would not be that good, and I do disagree.
I think it's very good. I think it's worth 2 colors. I think it's better than Joyra, but how much better than Joyra?
I mean, I think it would be probably like I might take that over an egg. Like, I don't know exactly,
I mean, that's
but
as good as Monastery Mentor. We take Monastery Mentor over an egg.
I wouldn't.
I think you're wrong, personally, but whatever.
I mean, I don't think Nadu and Monastery Mentor really compare.
Well, I mean, you still have to pass the turn with Nadu at some point, unless you have some other combo.
I think usually you will not pass it there.
Julien's over here just like, this is the spaghetti that you will drown in.
Anyway, I mean, that's a card you could just chuck in there. I think it's probably free because it's banned everywhere, so they're probably giving it away.
Hello, it's me, the one guy trying to buy a Nadu.
I have 4. We can...
Right.
We can make that work.
All right, we got to wrap this up. I got to go pick up my lovely spouse at the airport. I did want to say before we close that we have 2 new Cube events that got added to the Cube events page this past week, and both are international. We have London Cube Fest 2 for those of you in the UK looking to play some Cube in London. And also, very excitingly, Fiesta Nacional del Cubo in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Ooh.
I did look it up.
That's exciting.
We've had like 1,600 downloads in Argentina, most of which in Buenos Aires. So maybe I would love for somebody to find out about this Cube event from our podcast and go play at Fiesta Nacional del Cubo.
You're just having fun saying that.
It's fun to say, and I bet it'll be fun to do. Julian, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I think your wise words were very helpful in helping Anthony have some accountability and actually update his cubes.
Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to play the updated Turbo Cube 4 months from now.
Just soon. That sounds about right. I appreciate your reasonable timeline. I do feel like I have to ask, as the kitchen table correspondent, I know in your testing house you were also trying to figure out meal prep. How did that end up going? Did you end up cooking anything you were really excited about?
Yeah, I was able to cook the meals that I had planned for. I had made some spice mixes in advance. I had also learned from the previous Pro Tour that I needed to bring some kitchen utensils with me, such as specifically a kitchen knife.
Yeah.
But I did also not take some stuff that I regret not bringing, and I will be bringing on the next one, such as a can opener.
They didn't have a can opener.
They did.
I wouldn't expect
they
that one.
No, they had one, but it was like very bad and like half almost broken, like
Okay,
like
sure.
at and there was like even the previous one that was still in there, but that was completely broken and unusable. And when you cook for like 15 people and you have 12 cans of beans to open and you have a very bad can opener,
That's a very funny image.
Yeah,
That's a lot of beans in a house with a lot of Magic players. That's all I'm
well,
saying. Just an observation.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Well, you heard it here first. How to succeed at the Pro Tour. Make sure you bring a knife and a can opener.
All right, that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. If we got any of the card text wrong on this episode, that was completely intentional to bait you for engagement. So, actually, we should just tell people to say a card is cool in the comments. That's apparently the best way to bait engagement.
No, say a card's not cool.
Okay, yeah, sure. I say it's not cool, then they have to tell me if they think it's
Jade
cool.
Mage is cool, Andy. Why don't you think it's cool?
It's cooler than Mandibular Cut, I'll give you that much. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard about Magic cards and speaking to microphones about it. Thank you, Anthony and Julien, for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you both for all your help.
Vroom, vroom. This set was made for the Turbo Cube.
I know.
So I gotta go fast.